It's been 4 years since the launch of the Xbox 360, and 3 years since the PS3 hit the market. To this day, there's been endless debate on which console is number one. Each camp has hordes of fanboys ready to swarm to the defense against any attack against their preferred platform. Just visit News for Gamers or any other game blog, and there's bound to be a dispute or debate on the subject. Both devices are now well into their product cycle, and the time for excuses is now over. And in these series of videos, I'll be comparing the devices on a level playing field, where we are right now in Fall 2009. I'm going to be covering all the aspects of the devices, hardware, accessories, price, and functionality, the user experience both online and offline. We're also going to be comparing the top exclusive and multi-platform games of Fall 2009. It's all going to be covered in depth, so get ready for 12 rounds of heavyweight game console action. It's LP from Techno Buffalo, and welcome to the Console War Showdown. So, we're going to start off this matchup with a thorough analysis and comparison of the controllers. After all, the controllers are the physical extensions that connect the machine to the man in a sense. Wow, that was deep. Anyway, game controllers have evolved quite a lot in the past 30 years, and I remember being amazed by the 8-bit Nintendo controller after having used the clunky Atari 2600 joysticks. I also remember going to school and the teachers asking me what happened to my hands after I had band-aids on my thumbs. Well, I'll tell you what happened. Super Mario Bros. Metroid happened. The concave, relatively sharp-edged buttons on the 8-bit controller really brought the gaming community together, almost like a gang sign that appeared in the form of blisters on your thumbs. So here we are 20 years later looking at the PS3 and Xbox 360 controllers, and this time around they both actually look like something designed for the hand. So which is the better controller? The first DualShock is widely considered as the benchmark for modern controllers. 2 analog sticks, triggers for your index fingers, and rumble support. Pretty much every controller made after the DualShock has taken some aspects from its design. And yes, even the 360 controller has taken a lot from the DualShock controller. The button layout is essentially the same with the exception of analog stick placement, which was probably switched around with the regular D-pad to avoid patent infringement. Okay, let's talk about form factor. So here they are side by side, and the 360 controller is obviously a lot bulkier, and it's also quite a lot heavier than the PS3 controller. When we take a closer look at the controllers, we notice that the PS3 controller has a smooth surface, while the 360 controller has a fine texture to it. I've been using a DualShock controller since the original PlayStation days. The first DualShock was a nice fit in the hand back in the day, and the DualShock 3 also feels decent in the hand now. But after having the Xbox 360 controller in my hands, I have to admit that the DualShock 3 feels a bit tiny in the hand. The Xbox 360 controller is a snug fit in the hand, and it really feels like something made for an adult. Microsoft has definitely had some top ergonomics engineers working on the controller. It's large enough to support your entire fingers, and it truly feels comfortable. The smaller size of the DualShock equates to less support for your hands and fingers, and you actually have to bend your fingers quite a bit to hit the triggers. Pressing the triggers on the 360 controller feels a lot more natural. Even though the DualShocks have always proven successful, I would have liked to seen Sony make some bigger alterations ergonomically to the DualShock 3. Apparently the development budget was put into the 6-axis motion controls that really haven't gone beyond the novelty factor, and admittedly very few games take good use of the motion controls. I think it would have served Sony much better if the money invested in copying Nintendo would have been put in actually improving the form factor of the controller itself. But the 360 controller isn't perfect either. I have to mention I've been getting some pretty weird symptoms after using the controllers. I've been experiencing some numbness in my middle finger, and I figure that it's caused by the ridge under the back triggers that are pressed pretty intensely against some of the nerves on the joints of my fingers. Even though it may have given me an excuse to flip you guys the finger, I'm pretty serious about this. My finger's been numb for a week now, and I could probably stick a needle in there and not feel a thing. I can't be alone on this. Anyways, despite losing sensation in my middle finger, ergonomics-wise, the points go to the 360 controller. Okay, let's check out the build quality. As you can probably hear, the PS3 controller is a bit squeaky when a lot of force is put into it. Even though squeezing the controller may make it squeak a bit, the buttons with the exception of the back triggers feel very solid, and the DualShock 3 can definitely handle years of use. I've been using this particular controller for a couple of years now with hundreds and hundreds of hours of gameplay, and you can barely notice the wear and tear. So I can't not be satisfied with the durability of the PS3 controller. The 360 controller is definitely a lot heavier device, but apparently heft brings solidity. It's almost impossible to get the 360 controller to squeak when you squeeze it. The plastics feel a bit tougher than the DualShock plastics, and all of the buttons on the 360 controller feel very solid, and you can probably fight off a bear attack with the 360 controller. Okay, just a small bear. If a grizzly bear attacks you, you're pretty much a goner. Anyway, the point is I'm quite impressed with the solidity of the Xbox 360 controller. So I have to award build quality also to the Microsoft variant. As you have hopefully noticed, both controllers are wireless. The PlayStation 3 uses a Bluetooth connection and the Xbox 360 uses a 2.4 GHz wireless connection, which are both good up to about 30 feet or 10 meters. The Bluetooth connection is definitely more stable. Every once and again I seem to lose connection with the 360 controller, but it's nothing too serious. Battery life is about twice as good on the 360 controller. You can get about 40 hours with the Xbox variant, while the Bluetooth controllers will last you about 20 hours on the PS3. But a very annoying thing is that you have to buy rechargeable battery packs for the 360 controllers, which will cost you another $20 per controller. I think Microsoft saved money in the wrong place here. The PS3 controllers are rechargeable out of the box, and you can charge them from any USB powered device. Buying the rechargeable battery packs and charger is a bit of a hassle when the PS3 recharging is so effortless. Let's check out how the controller's buttons and layout translate into actual gameplay. The 360 controller's left analog stick and D-pad placement are different, but other than that, the layout is pretty much the same. In my opinion, having analog sticks placed symmetrically makes for better dual thumb coordination. I know it sounds kinda dumb, but I think you know what I mean. Also, there's a bit less strain on the left thumb when the analog stick is placed lower. The tops of the PS3 analog sticks are convex, while the tops of the analog sticks on the 360 controllers are concave. I really can't differentiate which feels better, because both feel very natural under the thumbs. The analog sticks on both controllers are very responsive. There's a slight dead zone on both controllers, and by dead zone I mean an area in which the controller does not register movement. The smaller the dead zone, the more intricate movements will register, which for example may result in more precise sniping. But I would estimate that the dead zone on both controllers is pretty much the same. The analog sticks on the 360 controllers definitely have a bit more resistance to them, which I kinda like. Having more resistance in the analog sticks, in my opinion, makes for better control in, for example, driving games. It's a bit easier to oversteer with the PS3 controller. Not to say that it doesn't happen with the Xbox 360 controller as well. I need to get me one of them Logitech G27 racing wheels, which actually cost more than my current car. Sad, I know. The PS3 analog sticks are definitely a bit looser, which actually may translate into faster movement in, for example, first-person shooters. Possibly the biggest weakness of the 360 controller is definitely the regular D-pad. In my opinion, it pretty much sucks. You notice this immediately when navigating the dashboard or typing text. It's simply put not very accurate. It's too easy to accidentally hit the upper left when you're simply trying to press up. It really doesn't work too great in Xbox arcade games where it's actually most needed. The D-pad solution on the PS3 controllers is definitely a lot more accurate, fast, and responsive. Also, one thing I have to mention is that the A and B, X and Y, and the D-pad buttons on the Xbox 360 controllers are made out of a glossy plastic that makes them feel a bit sticky at times, while the texture on the PS3 buttons feels a bit, well, not sticky. The triggers on the PS3 controller are definitely one of its weak points. The L2 and R2 triggers in the back bend down convexly, which can cause slippage, while they should be concave like the triggers on the 360. Setting down the PS3 controller on a table will sometimes result in an unintentional trigger press, which can for example enable rewinding when watching a movie, and can really spoil the moment, depending on the movie of course. The 360 controller triggers are backed by a ridge that prevents this issue. And the 360 controller triggers truly do feel a lot more like actual triggers, which may add a little something to first-person shooters. I also have to mention, when for example shooting up the neighborhood in Call of Duty, the vibration translates nicely into the triggers themselves on the 360 controller, which adds to the effect of shooting a gun. So the triggers are definitely better on the 360. I have to admit that I enjoy both controllers immensely. They're both in a sense damn good, but there are pros and cons on both controllers, and it'd serve Sony and Microsoft well if they got these controllers to mate to create something of a hybrid of the two. And here's what it might look like. Anyways, despite losing sensation in my middle finger, I do have to reward the first round of this battle to the Xbox 360. Because Sony, in my opinion, even though the DualShock 3 is great, Sony has played it a bit too safe because they really haven't improved much on the controller from previous iterations. So the Xbox 360 takes this round by a slight edge. Stay tuned for the next round where I take an in-depth look and analysis comparing the hardware. This is LP from Techno Buffalo, signing out.